The Curbsiders Teach podcast is for entertainment, education, and information purposes only, and the topics discussed should not be used solely to diagnose, treat, cure, or prevent any diseases or conditions.
Furthermore, the views and statements expressed on this podcast are solely those of the speakers and should not be interpreted to reflect the official policy or position of any entity. You should always do your homework and give us any feedback.
Welcome back to Curbsiders Teach Season 4, our series on health professions education. I'm Dr. Molly Hoiblein, joined by my co-host, Dr. Ira Kurzhanovskaya. On today's episode, we'll discuss inclusive mentorship with Dr. Ray Bignall. Before we get started with that, Ira, will you remind the audience what we do on this show?
You got it, Molly. We are the health professions podcast for all things education. We use expert interviews to bring you teaching pearls, practice-changing knowledge to inspire the next generation of clinician educators. We have a fantastic conversation with our guest, Dr. Ray Bignall, tonight. We cover approaches to inclusive mentorship, kind of strategies for mentors and mentees to really get the most out of this relationship and kind of acknowledge and be aware of differences. So prepare yourself for so many gems coming your way.
Dr. Ray Bignall is Chief Diversity and Health Equity Officer at Nationwide Children's Hospital in Columbus, Ohio, and is an Associate Professor of Pediatrics at Ohio State University College of Medicine. A graduate of Howard University and Meharry Medical College, Dr. Bignall completed his pediatrics residency, clinical fellowship in nephrology, and NIH postdoctoral research fellowship at Cincinnati Children's Hospital Medical Center. Dr. Bignall's work addresses social determinants of kidney, child, and community health through community-based scholarship, engagement, and advocacy.
And we're excited to bring you this season of Curbsiders Teach with the support of and in partnership with the Alliance for Academic Internal Medicine. A reminder that most episodes are available for CME credit through VCU Health CE for all health professionals at curbsiders.vcuhealth.org. Thank you to all our Patreon members. If you love the Curbsiders family content and haven't joined yet, please consider supporting us and continuing to create this amazing resource. So without further ado, let's get to it.
Hi, Dr. Bignall. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're really excited to sit down and chat with you. Are you okay if we call you Ray today?
That's perfect. It is such a pleasure to be here with you guys. Thank you so much.
Amazing. Well, if you've ever listened to the Curbsiders shows, we like to start with a couple rapid fire questions just to have my listeners get to know our guests better and hear a little bit more casual stuff from you. Could you give us a one-liner to describe yourself?
So my name is Ray Bignall. I'm a pediatric nephrologist and Chief Diversity and Health Equity Officer at Nationwide Children's Hospital. I care deeply about health equity. I care deeply about engaging populations and communities and breaking down the barriers between the academic health system and the populations that we serve.
And could you share something about yourself from outside of medicine?
Yeah, so I'm married. I've been married for almost 11 years now. And my wife and I have a 1.5-year-old named Liam, who is all over our socials. So people have probably seen him. I'm sure we're going to grow up and he's going to call us a sharent. I've heard that that's the title that is being used now for parents who overshare their kids online. But
I haven't
sorry,
heard
it's an
that term.
addiction.
I know. I'm
I love
no, I guess.
Okay, now we know.
I love talking about my son, and he's just really the light of our world and a real delight. And yeah, we're enjoying him.
Amazing. That's such a fun age where they're really starting to get so much more interactive and talking a little bit. And
Yeah, it is so fun.
I love that. And Ray, I think there was something else that people might not know about you, that you have a special skill that maybe you haven't used that skill recently,
Yeah.
but kind of allowing yourself to get out into the air a little bit.
Sure. I'm sure you're alluding to the fact that I'm a licensed private pilot. The only thing I've ever really wanted to do in life since I was a small child was fly planes. And medicine came later, but flying planes was my first passion. My dad is an aviation enthusiast and a physicist. And when I was growing up, all of my vacations and birthdays and things, we would be going to Air Force bases or naval air stations and looking at the planes and going to air shows. And I just absolutely loved it and had the opportunity through a family friend to become a licensed pilot when I finished my first year of college at Howard University. And yeah, so that was actually a long time. And I had a huge gap between the last time my license was active and today because of medical school and residency and fellowship and starting out as a new faculty member and now a new dad. I'm sure a lot of
Mhm.
pilots can appreciate that. But the goal right now for me personally is getting back in the air and getting to share that experience, that passion with my family.
That's awesome. Well, it is very hard to carve out time for your own
Mhm.
interests with so much going on. And I think
Yes.
also so important to remember those passions that you had before medicine and hold on to those. Do you have some meaningful advice or feedback that you've received along your time in your training or in your career that really has had a lasting impact on you?
Yeah, the thing I'd want to share is maybe not feedback I've received directly, but it's feedback that I've grown to appreciate, and I share with my mentees, having had this experience myself. I talk to a lot of pre-meds and a lot of
Mm.
medical students about careers in medicine, several who have seen some of the interesting things that I've done in my own career and I think are interested in doing similar things. They've asked me, like, what do I need to do? How do I get there? And the best advice I can give them is actually slow down.
Mm.
I think for so many of us in medicine, we're looking to jump to the next thing. I went straight through undergrad to medical school. I usually tell students don't do that. A lot of the best advice I've heard from faculty who are actually in the medical education space is that they want to see trainees who haven't done that. They want to see
Mm.
trainees who are actually, they've held a job down for a while or they've done some really interesting thing out in the world. They've had even another career before coming to medicine. It shows that they're rounded. There's obviously tons of super smart people, really talented physicians who've gone straight through their training and didn't have any gaps in between. But I generally think that if individuals slow down in their training experience, they'll have an opportunity to be better informed when they get to the next stage. And so often, the field we're in sort of demands of us more and more in terms of the busyness of the work that we do. And it runs counter to what we should be doing for our own professional development, which is often just taking some time to reflect and understand who we are and who we want to be. And so I usually tell folks, slow down a little bit, enjoy each stage of your training and your career as you come through it.
Totally. I feel that I took a year off after my like preclinical year and a half in med school and did some public health work. And it was totally something I needed to do at that point and was just,
Right.
so tired from all the classroom work and was like, am I really doing what I want to be doing? And it gave me a lot of
Mm.
perspective about, you know, being in the profession that I want to be in. And I think having those outside experiences are really valuable.
That's so interesting to hear. I talk to medical students sometimes, and I joke with them because I know what they're doing. Like I said, I bet all of you have calculated how old you'll be when you finish residency or fellowship and you become an attending. Okay, I'm going to be this many years old, and you're doing all this math. And I joke like you have no idea what that math is going to look like. Like I didn't even really appreciate that I would want to do a fellowship when I was in medical
Mm.
school.
Mhm.
Well, that adds time to the math. It makes my math null and void. I didn't know that I would extend my fellowship by a year, which totally benefited me. I'm super grateful to my fellowship for allowing me the space to do that. It made me an incredibly versatile nephrologist today. I would never have thought about getting a fellowship by a year in the phases of my training where I was doing all that ridiculous math. I think taking time to understand who you are is really, really valuable. And Molly, hearing you share that experience, I hope inspires some of our listeners to think that they can do incredible things too when they take, I don't call them gap years, I call them growth years in
Ooh.
between their clinical expectations and clinical training milestones to really figure out who they are, what they want to do, and have a richer experience when they get to the next stage.
I do also want to say for the people who haven't taken time off, because some of us charged our way through,
Yep.
Ray, I hear you on that. That it's never too late to also slow down, and to take Ray's advice around that, and really like
Mm.
have a sense, even if you're 3 years into faculty, 10 years into faculty, or maybe in the middle of fellowship, just like you did, to say like, is this what I need right now? Do I need some growth time? Do I need to just step away, come back, and kind of really doing that reflection? I think whether it's in med school or before or even way after, I think there's a place for it.
I hope you're taking that to heart, Yura, because you are one of the most overcommitted people I know.
I'm hearing it, and it's like it's like a space right here. No. I'm thinking about it. Don't worry, I'm thinking.
Listen, I had this conversation with my wife this week. So my wife is a pediatric psychologist. We met when I was in residency, and she was finishing up her PhD in child psychology at the University of Cincinnati. And oh my gosh, we had this conversation literally this week, just talking about how overcommitted we are and
Yes.
that we're not able to dedicate the amount of time we want to dedicate to our family right now. And it's incredible because when she was pregnant, I made the commitment that when Liam was born, I was basically going to take a year off of doing grand rounds, going to conferences and all of that. And I had been on a clip where I was probably giving a grand rounds talk at least once or twice a month for the year or two leading up to that. And it was just draining. And we knew I had one of my best friends from medical school, Dr. Brandon Blue, who's an oncologist BMT doc at Moffitt in Tampa Bay. He told me, he said, Ray, he said, you just need to tell everybody right now you're unavailable. You're unavailable until at least winter of 2023. Our son was born in 2022. And I was like, man, are you sure? He said, dude, you're unavailable. You're unavailable. And I actually created a little, I have like a little email, a sort of a standard email that I send back to folks when they invite me to come speak. And I actually added a new paragraph that says, thank you so much for this invitation. In order to support my family as we expand our family, I am taking a hiatus from engagement until this date. And is it possible to consider scheduling something with your team after this date? And people were so appreciative. I had people tell me, oh my gosh, I'm stealing this paragraph. Thank you so much for saying this. I think we are always afraid, especially in academic medicine, we get afraid that if we say no, at some point, it'll sort of be the last time people will ask us to do something. It'll be the last opportunity we'll have to level up our career in some way. And we're always our personalities are type A. We're super dedicated to our craft and to our practice. We're always looking for a way to advance, even if it's incrementally. And we feel this sort of personal injury when we say no to things. And I was listening to this terrific interview with Meryl Streep, where she said she still to this day is nervous, anxious when she turns down a role because she wonders if it's the last time someone's going to offer her a role. And that's Meryl Streep, the greatest actress of all time. Like, are you kidding me? She is still afraid that if she turns down a role, no one's going to ask her to take another role. So if that happens to people at the highest level of their craft in some of the most competitive industries and fields, if that same feeling is going to happen to us, we should know that if we continue to put good work out into the world, good scholarship, people are going to be interested in that. And we should be prioritizing our own health, our mental health, our families, those things that really matter. We really should be prioritizing those things.
I love that.
I'm so glad we had this conversation. I know this isn't where we're supposed to go, but this is so
great.
This is
actually a therapy session for
we should just
Ira and Molly.
Like, you will mentor us today on air, and you will help us with work-life balance.
Yes, exactly. How do we integrate all our desires here?
I need to learn to practice what I preach. That's the next step for me too.
All of us. Also, I just want to highlight that email that you shared. I feel like it kind of reminds me of, we had Dr. Kimberly Manning on, who also shared kind of that she has this like rolling.
My big sis.
Yes, she has this document where she has all these email templates of like, in case this person asked me to do this, but I don't want to do it right now, like what to share. And I feel like yours perfectly segues into, one of those, and just encourage our listeners to start building their Rolodex of these templated email responses to be ready.
That is big sis. That's my social media big sis. Absolutely. Anything Dr. Manning says, we should just do.
Implement.
Just do whatever. Just implement whatever Dr. Manning tells us to do. Yes. Absolutely.
Well, maybe before we dive deeper into mentoring for real this time, I know Ira loves to share a pick of the week, so let's hear what you got this week, Ira.
I do, Molly. Thanks. So I am reading a book that I'm almost done with, but I'm still obsessed with, and I'm also late to the game because this was, I think, Barack Obama's like book of 2023, but it's The Heaven and Earth Grocery Store by James McBride. I don't know if either of you have read it, but I am very late to the game on this. It seems like everyone I tell, they're like, oh my gosh, yes. Have you read his, Deacon King Kong? And I'm like, no, but I will after this. And basically the story is he kind of walks you through a small town in Pennsylvania. The story actually opens up with the discovery of a skeleton in a well in this small town. And then he kind of takes us back 50 years to explore the kind of area of Chicken Hill in Pottstown, Pennsylvania, and really like sets up just a super interesting, almost mystery, because it's this community of immigrants, Jewish people, Black people, and there's like this mix of characters and all their different lives and their shared histories, and just kind of the power of community and family and love to really address, racism, sexism, honestly, every ism that came into play. And he does such a beautiful job in the narration and kind of embodying the characters too. So just highly recommend Heaven and Earth Grocery Store. Molly, do
I
you have a
downloaded it
pick?
after we traveled to AIM and at your recommendation, and I have an unpopular opinion that it was not my favorite.
No.
I feel like needed to be like half as long. It just
Oh yes, it is
went
long.
on for
It is
too
long.
long, and yeah,
I know, but the storyline was like, ooh, my heart was cold.
it was very
See,
popular.
this is why you got to do audiobooks.
I'm audibling it.
Another Dr. Manning piece of advice. She loves audiobooks, and
Yeah.
and I do too. I think it helps to address the long page turner situation.
Yes. Yeah.
Totally agree.
My recommendation is going to be a book as well. It's The Paper Daughters of Chinatown by Heather Moore. It's a story about a woman in San Francisco around the turn of the century and her work as a Christian ministry to help rescue girls who were brought over to China and brought into like slavery and the sex trade. And it was just a really interesting portrait of life in Chinatown at that time, living in San Francisco. Just interesting to like learn about a culture that I was not at all familiar with. And with the Chinese Exclusion Act, there were really very few women allowed to immigrate into the United States. And so there was a big market in selling women for sex in that time. And just a really cool story about rescuing hundreds or even thousands of these women and helping them get their lives back to, a safer place. So a very good read. Or listen. I actually listen to all my books. So
Yeah, that's good. That's awesome.
yeah.
Well, I'll go next, and I'll share two. And we'll, in the spirit of mixed media, I will share a podcast, and I will share a YouTube channel, actually. So I imagine there's probably a significantly high overlap of people who listen to this podcast and also listen to the Human Doctor podcast featuring Dr. Manning and Dr. Ashley McMullen, of course, at UCSF. I really hope if there are a handful of listeners who are not listening to that podcast, that they start. It is one of the best parts of my week, getting a chance to listen to that podcast and reflect on what it means for my own practice and what it means for how I interface with others inside and outside of medicine. It's a wonderful, wonderful listen. And I'm just thrilled to have an opportunity to shout it out. And then a fun YouTube channel that I am completely obsessed with this person.
You mean besides ours, Ray? I know you're obsessed with ours.
Of course.
In addition to ours.
In addition, yes, absolutely. In addition to the Curbsiders and the Curbsiders family of media, the media empire that is the Curbsiders / Cribsiders, shout out pediatrics. I would love to suggest also City Nerd. Okay, so this is a really interesting gentleman who is, I believe, an urban planner, and he has the driest sense of humor, just dry as a chip, and it's so incredibly funny. And he basically talks about how our urban spaces could be more accessible and useful to people, regular people. He is absolutely, utterly allergic to cars and car-based infrastructure, and he has really challenged the way that I think about the spaces in which people live and work and play and what have you. I think it's especially relevant to us as pediatricians and physicians because, we deal with a lot of families who struggle with social disadvantage. The most impoverished demographic in the United States are children.
Mm.
And if those children, especially if those children live in urban places and urban areas, many aspects of the built environment adversely affect them. And so listening to someone who thinks all the time about how to make the built environment better for people
Yeah.
has helped me as a pediatrician and a physician to think about how decisions and policies that we make as an institution are impacting the populations of people we care for, especially those at highest risk for social disadvantage. And if you're into just like super snarky top 10 lists, I'm telling you, City Nerd is a terrific channel. It's not super big, it's not super popular,
It will
but
be
it's great.
now.
Well,
I know
Ray,
it will
yes.
be.
I don't remember the last time somebody shouted out a YouTube channel. So,
Yeah.
yes, for all the
Yeah.
YouTube channels out there.
And an
Thank you for
urban
that.
planning comedy YouTube channel. That's
I know.
taking it to the next
So
level.
niche. It's so niche. Yep.
Thank you for that.
Amazing.
Thank you.
Well, let's focus on our actual topic today. Although I would love to talk about the most recent episode from The Human Doctor. I don't know if you guys listened to it yet this week.
Yes.
It was so good. Ashley's story about caring for a veteran who had been recently incarcerated. And it just really made me reflect on some of my patients that I have complex relationships with, and very beautiful.
And I just think the title of their podcast, like
Redemption.
Human Doctor,
Yeah.
it goes back to what we were talking about today. Like, I'm human. I can't commit to these things, or like maybe I need to slow down for all these things. Like, just reminding yourself that you're both a human and a doctor. I don't know. Every time I listen, I'm like, yes, we are human. This is amazing.
So to go to our case from Kashlak, we are actually going to talk about mentoring today.
Yeah.
Julia is a new faculty who's an eager educator, and she's excited to get more involved in mentorship. She's assigned as the Resident Advising and Development, or RAD, mentor for a first-year resident, Joe. Julia looks up his information in the intern bio book and learns that Joe wrote that they have many different aspects to their identity across gender, sex, race, ethnicity, background, upbringing. Even their favorite foods could not be more different. Julia worries if she will be the best mentor for Joe and how she should approach their first meeting. So, Ray, to take a step back, could you reflect on how mentorship has been important for you and how it shaped your career and helped you become the physician you are today?
Yeah, that is such a great question. I'm interested to dive into this case. In short, mentorship has meant everything. It's meant everything for me and my career. We don't have enough time to talk about all of the complex, interwoven aspects of mentorship that have impacted me. I will start actually with my family. So I'm a first generation American. My parents are immigrants from Jamaica, and they met here in the United States, had been living in the state for a few years prior to meeting. And in unique ways, both of my parents have constituted the beginning of my mentorship journey. My earliest memories of my family actually were while my dad was in graduate school at Florida State, getting his PhD in physics. And my mom worked. She worked inside of the home during the day to watch me while my dad was at school. And then when dad would come home from school, he would watch me, and my mom would go work as a health unit coordinator in a hospital. And watching the ways in which they sacrificed for one another and they sacrificed for our family in unique ways was incredible. My mom actually just recently earned her doctorate in education a few years ago, which was really in many ways the culmination of her gift to our family in sacrificing to support the goals of her husband and the goals of her two kids as they went on to higher education and careers. So that is, to me, a great example of mentorship. Unlike many other young people, especially young people of color, young Black men, my floor was PhD of physics because that is what I witnessed at home. And I owe that entirely to my family. So I do think that that is an important component of mentorship to acknowledge. In medical school, I was under the delusion that I was going to be a surgeon, I think, for far too long. And I remember when I realized that I didn't want to do surgery, I wanted to do pediatrics instead. And it was an existential crisis for me. I don't know if anyone else has sort of had that frightening crisis when you realize that the thing you really want to do is different than the thing you've told everybody else that you want to do. And maybe there's some social pressure pushing you in the other direction that aside from where you really want to go. Her name's Dr. Regina Fodele. And I spoke to her. She herself was a surgeon. And I spoke to her. I could take you back to the place in my med school where she had this conversation with me. And she said, Ray, I'm going to tell you something right now. You do not need to put yourself under any pressure to become a surgeon. You do not need to be a surgeon to be an amazing doctor. In fact, these are her words, you're going to be an incredible doctor no matter what you do. And that the moment she said that, it like unlocked for me my potential. It loosened the shackles that I had placed on myself about my potential and where I could go in my career, and especially whether or not I would disappoint people. And yeah, it was at that time I said, great, I'm going to do peds. It's going to be awesome. But I think probably the biggest formative mentorship for me was the decision to become a pediatric nephrologist. Totally not on my bingo card. Okay. For one, I will just say I didn't have the greatest experience with nephrology as a medical student. I think a lot of people can probably say they didn't have the greatest experience with nephrology as a medical student. And I remember when I started, even when I started the first week of my renal block at Cincinnati Children's as a first-year resident, if you told me at the end of my first week that I was going to be a nephrologist, I would have told you there was a precisely 0.00% chance, p-value less than 0.0001, I am going to become there's no way on earth I'm going to be a nephrologist. And over the course of that month, I encountered 3 faculty members who utterly shifted my world. Dr. Stu Goldstein, who to this day is probably my biggest mentor and sponsor. He, in and of himself, is a world-renowned pediatric nephrologist. He's one of those nephrologists who sort of walks the halls and people whisper in hushed tones, oh, that's Dr. Goldstein, and the fact that he told me during rounds one day that I had done such a great job and that the decision I had suggested making on rounds, that's exactly what I would have done, is what he told me. I was like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what he would have done. He poured into me, and still to this day pours into me so much. Dr. Brad Dixon, who's the head of peds nephrology at Colorado Children's now, he gave me my first ever compliment as a faculty member and told me that I was doing a great job after a week where I had done an atrocious job and I had to put in so much work as a first-year resident to kind of get my legs under me. And Dr. Jens Goebel, who is a peds nephrologist at DeVos Children's in Grand Rapids, and he inspired me, actually told me about the advocacy training program in nephrology that launched my career as a pediatric advocate. Prior to that moment, I didn't realize that you could do advocacy work as a subspecialty pediatrician. I thought, well, I'm going to have to give this up because obviously I'm going to have to do research if I want to do subspecialty, because there's no way that I could have a meaningful career as a physician advocate in subspecialty, because I'd never seen that before. And he opened my eyes to the fact that that was possible. And those 3 men have impacted my career more in terms of setting my trajectory where it is now than anyone else. And I would just say those 3 men share very little in common with me demographically. And also, all 3 of them are doing something very different than what I do now. But they still saw enough in me and found a way to contribute to my life meaningfully, such that I am having the thrilling and fulfilling career that I have now, doing something very different from them, but because of them. And I think that says a lot about who we can be to others as mentors.
Ray, I love that. I feel like you highlighted the power of like normalization, the power of affirmation, the power of inspiration within these kind of individual mentorships, all the way going back to parents and high school and kind of leading up to faculty time. I wonder, we've had kind of a maybe we'll say like foundational level 1 episode on mentorship with Drs. Jane Liebschwitz and Mitch Feldman. And we kind of covered the basics, but, I wonder if we can expand on what you just shared, which is kind of how you take all those experiences with these incredible mentors that you've had to inform your approach to being a mentor, and like how you think about mentorship broadly, especially maybe when there are differences of identities, but also like taking into account the incredible rich history that you've had with mentors, going back to even your childhood. But like, how do those things maybe get applied within your mentorship kind of approach?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I think of it in much the same way that professional sports teams will talk about coaching trees. I don't know if you've heard of this concept, but like there are, super famous coaches of professional or collegiate athletic teams who spawn from them other coaches. Maybe these are people who used to play for them, who then become coaches themselves, and then their players become coaches. It's like you pass down this rich tradition of learned lessons from one mentor to the other. I learned years later that some of the concepts that, for example, Dr. Goldstein taught me as a resident and fellow in pediatrics and pediatric nephrology, some of those concepts were taught to him by his mentor, the late Dr. Bill Harmon, who's many people would regard as like one of the godfathers of pediatric kidney transplant. He was a faculty member at Boston Children's who passed away a few years ago. And it's so exciting to hear. Like, I will tell stories about things that were taught to me by Dr. Goldstein, and Dr. Goldstein will say, "Yeah, by the way, I learned that from Bill Harmon." And I'm like, "Oh, really?" Because I'm telling my residents that when I'm rounding, this is the advice and things that I'm sharing with them, and it's wonderful to see that legacy live on. I think that's one way that it happens. I think another way that it happens is learning how to apply diverse experiences to your unique circumstances. This is really, really important. I think a lot of the trainees that I engage with now, they're expecting to find sort of one golden mentor who will look like them, come from their small town, have their same experiences, be in the exact same field that they're in, and sort of, I don't know, like mythically show them the way. Just put your foot where my foot was just placed. And I think that's a very unrealistic and actually not desirable way to foster mentorship. You can have a much better mentorship experience if you, number one, cultivate mentors who are in different fields but have good advice for you. And number two, cultivate a lot of mentors. We don't have to have just one. It's not pie. There's plenty to go around for everyone, right? So I have a ton of mentors. I've mentioned several already, by the way, none of whom do what I do now. I have other mentors, like peer mentors. There are some folks whose entire mentoring capacity for you will be pointing you to other people to talk to. Those people are also terrific mentors because they're showing you the way. So what I tell trainees about mentorship and seeking mentorship is simple. I tell them, don't look for someone who's doing exactly what you want to do. Look for someone who meets two criteria. Number one, they have something of value to offer. And number two, they are absolutely sold out on your success. They can see the potential that you have to contribute something meaningfully in your field, in your space, and they are willing to do whatever it takes to help you achieve that. And I'm very fortunate that I've had a lot of those people in my life. I'm continuing to cultivate people like that in my life, and I encourage trainees looking for mentorship to do the same thing.
And Ray, I just want to highlight really quick your coaching tree comment, because I think that was like one of the first times I'd heard about it. But a quick Google search reveals that like somebody like Greg Popovich, who's been coaching for forever.
Great example.
Has, many branches of the trees, including other coaches for other
That's
MBA
right.
teams.
That's
And
right.
controversial opinion, I don't see JJ Redick on there. So just,
Oh, well,
I know, I'm gonna throw a little
so
shade. Just a little,
that's a little shade. You can throw a little shade.
Yeah.
So JJ Redick, though, was coached by the great Mike Krzyzewski at Duke.
That's true.
And who knows if he'll be a great coach or not. But he is part of that coaching tree and imagine all of the great
Oh my
Duke
gosh.
players
Coach
and
K,
right.
yeah.
I love the Greg Popovich example, not to get too deep into NBA. We could talk about the NBA a lot if you want
I
to.
know.
Not to get too deep into the NBA, but I love the Greg Popovich example because Greg Popovich he's a Hall of Fame basketball coach, and he is a multi-championship winner,
Mhm.
right? But
Mhm.
his coaching style is different from probably his most successful, or maybe it's not altogether that different. It appears different on the outside to one of his all-time greatest um, coaching prodigies, Steve Kerr, who
Yes.
is also a multi-championship winner. It's almost like when you learn from someone's greatness, you predispose yourself to replicating their greatness as well, even if you do it in a slightly different way. And I think that that's the best lesson to learn in the coaching tree example. Is you can still be yourself, but when you learn from greatness, you can learn to apply those skills and lessons. And I'll just add really briefly as well. Sometimes you can also learn what not to do.
Mm.
There are a lot of people who I wouldn't necessarily describe as my mentors, but
Mm.
people from whom I've learned mentoring lessons. And I'm like, yeah, when I get to your stage, I will definitely not do that. I don't have to go into specifics here, but
Yeah.
I have definitely learned those lessons. And offline, I share with my trainees, I'm going to tell you this because I had this terrible experience when I was in your shoes, and I don't want you to have this experience or for you to
Mhm.
pass this experience on.
Amazing. Well, coming back to our case, if Julia comes to you as her peer mentor, and she's really enthusiastic about mentoring, but she doesn't have this chain of greats above her that mentored her, and so she's not as confident in her skills as a mentor, and she is raising those concerns about, am I going to be a good mentor because Joe and I don't share these surface characteristics, or we have differences in our identities. What would you say to her?
Yeah. So the first thing I would ask Julia is, do you care about Joe? What about Joe inspires you and makes you want to help them to be successful? Because if Julia can answer that question positively, that's the most important step. Some of the greatest relationships that I've had with mentees, I have asked myself, what in the world am I contributing to your success? But I know I'm contributing something because they keep coming back. They keep asking questions. I even ask them, is this helpful?
Yeah.
Absolutely. And, I hear them in the background writing things down. I'm like, I don't know what you're writing, but I hope it's helpful. Very, very often we underestimate just how hungry our trainees and mentees are for valuable, genuine mentoring relationships.
Mm.
And when they receive them, it means a great deal. So the first thing I would ask is, do you care about Joe? Because if Julia cares about Joe, then I think she will probably do a decent job of mentoring Joe. Now, the degree to which she can mentor Joe is based on a number of factors. It's based on Julia's expertise. Does she have something of value to share with Joe that's going to be meaningful in advancing their career?
Mm.
That I don't know. We would have to explore that together. If Julia is my mentee, we would take some time to explore that. Number two, what is it that Joe's looking for? I think that's an important question
Yeah.
to understand as well. Is Joe looking for someone who can mentor them through the sort of lowercase p institutional politics of navigating their academic experience in that institution? And if so, does Julia have enough understanding and expertise to navigate that successfully and properly advise Joe? We would have to explore that together. Is Joe looking for someone who can mentor them as they are exploring their professional development and career potential? Another great question that Julia would need to answer. We should not underestimate our capacity to help people whose career trajectories are different from our own. Just
Mhm.
remember some of the examples I've given you guys from stories of people who've been so meaningful to me. I'm sure you
Yeah.
have examples of people in your own careers who do very different things, except the one thing that you rely on them for good advice and mentorship. But we do want to make sure that we have some capacity, something of value to share. And then the last thing I would do specifically to address Julia's concern about not knowing how to properly advise Joe, especially in the context of Joe's minoritized identity? Get help.
Mhm.
Please get help. I do not want folks leaving our conversation today thinking that they should just go willy-nilly mentor everyone. If you are engaging with a trainee or anyone with whom there is some question about your capacity or capabilities to mentor, get help. Talk
Yeah.
to someone who can give you good advice. I hope you have a mentor that you can ask about how to mentor someone else. One of the things that's great about living in this social media age is that we can find mentorship in so many great places. Going on hashtag med Twitter, and yes, I still call it that, or if a friendlier space like Threads or Instagram or whatever, to engage with folks who are in different corners of medicine with different experiences than what you have, can be a great place to get advice. And so many people are very, very accessible on these platforms. I know I try to be as accessible as possible at Dr. Ray MD, by the way, on all my socials. So feel free to come and give me a follow and share your thoughts and feelings. And I'm do the best I can to help you as well. But yeah, for sure, get help. Make sure you're not navigating that new mentoring experience alone.
And Ray, if I can be a little concrete, just because I'm occasionally a little concrete, if
Sure.
you were to advise Julia on like that first interaction with Joe, do you find it helpful to kind of name up front, like these are things that I care about as, your mentor and seeing you succeed in medicine. And I also want to name that there are differences between us and that I am committed to your success in spite of or despite of or working through kind of the biases and kind of differences that we may have. Like, how would you maybe encourage her to consider, besides getting help, maybe getting
Yeah.
help in the conversation, but like
Yeah.
specifically naming those differences? Or would that not be something you'd advise?
Era, that is a great question. And my honest answer to that is I think it depends. It depends on your comfortability engaging with Joe. So in this case, Julia's comfortability engaging with Joe. I would tell Joe if she, excuse me, I would tell Julia if she feels the need to state that up front, if she feels like her blind spots engaging with some of Joe's minoritized identities is so great that she herself is nervous or anxious about providing adequate mentorship to Joe,
Mhm.
then she should probably self-disclose. But I also think she should recognize Joe obviously sees something in her and her capacity to mentor them that makes Joe comfortable going to Julia and saying, I need your help. I think you can help me.
Yeah.
And so, again, we should not underestimate our capacity to help others. I'll tell you, I see this happen a lot for me. I hear faculty come up to me who will say, hey, Ray, I have this amazing African American student that I am mentoring, but I don't know if I'm the best person to mentor them.
Mm.
Can you help them? and I will. And so the answer is sure. Like I'm more than happy to help them if I had the bandwidth and opportunity. But you're probably doing a great job, actually. Like they came to you because they know you're fabulous at what you do. I'll give you a great example. There's a gentleman here at Nationwide Children's, one of my closest friends in our division, Dr. Brian Bignall. Okay. And I mean this in the nicest way possible. Brian is just about like the most stereotypical example of like a white guy I can think of, okay, at our hospital. And he happens to also be one of the most incredible and dynamic mentors of minority trainees that this institution has.
Wow.
And I promise you, he is not doing anything special or different. Yeah, I promise you, he's not doing anything special or different, except he's just being himself. He's just being himself. And he's such a terrific mentor. He recognizes that there are unique differences in the trainees that he's mentoring. He celebrates them and he acknowledges and engages with them in an authentic way. He is, by the way, also a terrific mentor to non-minoritized trainees. or individuals whose minoritized status is not as ingrained in who they are. It's not as a part of their the identity with which they navigate the world. What he is a great mentor. And I think that's the point. That's the reason I love sharing that story. I know so many trainees, in fact, mostly Black women trainees that I have interacted with who've happened to also be mentees of Dr. Bignall. And they come up to me and say, this is the best mentor I've ever had. He is absolutely fantastic. I'm extremely proud to be his faculty colleague. And I'm also really glad that this is not something like he's not advertising his success with or his facility with mentoring people of minoritized backgrounds. He's just being a great mentor who has learned how to mentor all individuals, including those with minoritized identities. So if my colleague, Dr. Bignall, can do it, I know I can do it with people whose identities are different from me. And I'm sure Julia can do it with Joe as well.
I love that. And I was kind of struggling when we were writing the script for this and sort of balancing that. Like, I feel like to be a great mentor, you just be a good person and a good listener and see people as people. I did find this amazing workshop published by Dr. Nora Osman, who's a friend of the pod, around this topic of mentoring across differences. And she was really in the workshop highlighting the importance of naming those identities up front and trying to bring awareness to the fact that some mentors may have blind spots in areas or may not be able to truly appreciate what some of the trainees are going through because of, their own privilege. And sounds like for you, you're recommending just kind of naming those if it's something that really gets in the way of Julia's ability to feel like she can openly connect with Joe.
Exactly. It's one of the reasons why these mentorship relationships are so fraught, because they often do rely on the mentor having the depth of introspection to appreciate what those gaps are that they have themselves. I think that's terrific advice from Dr. Osman. And the truth is, you have to be able to acknowledge the differences. Using my colleague, the incredible Dr. Bignall, as an example, he is very open about understanding differences, acknowledging privilege. By the way, we all have privilege depending on the circumstances or the context and environments that we navigate. And Dr. Bignall is one person who recognizes that privilege and understands how it's different from others. I actually think that's why minoritized individuals appreciate so much the mentorship he provides, because they feel seen, they feel acknowledged. I would argue that the fact that Julia is asking this question of herself and a mentor suggests that she has that capacity to recognize that gap and want to do something to address it. And I think, as we were discussing briefly earlier, working through how Julia feels and understanding what it is Joe needs from Julia will help her to be such a more successful mentor to Joe when the time comes.
Right. This is super helpful. And I feel like not the Julia is era, but there are lots of overlaps here that may have been in the case that we wrote. But I feel like that understanding that kind of introspection is important in this, and being able to reflect on that and get help, ask an amazing near peer kind of colleague that's inspiring, like Dr. Bignall, to like bring it home for us and help us understand the key parts of this. If we were to like move the case along a little bit and kind of apply the strategies that you're encouraging us to employ, let's say Julia is meeting with Joe, gets to know him, and kind of finds out that they're very focused on kind of work-life integration and making sure that they're prioritizing their wellness. And Julia reflects that during her training, there may have been times where, kind of like we started off this conversation, you just full steam ahead, you push through. You don't take time to think about what's going on internally and taking your own temperature and taking time for yourself. And I wonder, when we think about mentorship relationships where the focus or the priorities are different maybe than people's previous experiences, how can we guide Julia or help her adjust her approach maybe when we have these kind of potentially generational, potentially internal processing differences?
I love that question. That was so diplomatically phrased. I love it. I appreciate exactly what you're asking. Our listeners can't see the big smirk I had on my face while you were asking the question, because I literally have that conversation so often with my medical student trainees. And it's very different, the conversation I have with my pre-med and medical student trainees, than I have with like co-fellows and faculty peer mentees and stuff like that. And it has everything to do with the generational divide there. There is an emphasis in today's society on work-life integration. I think people are even moving away from the work-life balance description and calling it work-life integration. In some ways, it's almost a defeatist notion, because we realize we'll never be able to achieve balance. The best we can hope for is
Yes.
integration. This is where it takes work for the mentor. The mentor really does need to take some time to reflect on what is important to your mentee
Mm.
versus what is important to you. And it is really important to not just use your time as a mentor to reinforce what you did back in your day, but instead to understand the context within which the mentee is operating and provide valuable feedback for the mentee in that space. And it requires you to do some things like that's where you have to do some hard work as a mentor. You got to put your ear to the ground or your stethoscope to the ground and listen for what the vibes are right now. Like what are people doing right now? What is the movement right now? It's why you can't just assume that all change is negative change.
Mm.
That, yeah, residents are working less continuous hours than we worked when I was a resident, and then my mentor worked when she was a resident. But guess what? That's probably a good thing. It's probably safer for patients. It's better for our trainees. It's probably a good thing all around. And we should learn how to be able to give advice within those contexts. So one of the things that I try to do is I try very hard to listen objectively and empathetically to the questions and requests that I'm getting from my trainees.
Mhm.
I try to understand exactly what they're asking and be honest and upfront to our discussion a moment ago about where I may have some biases based on my experiences, my prior experiences. So, for instance, if we were talking about work-life integration, this seems to be something that's important to Joe. And let's say that Julia's experience as a trainee was very different from Joe's, and she wants to be meaningfully advise Joe on what they should do. I would first ask some questions. Hey, Joe, tell me a little bit about what you expect your your ideal day to look like. What kind of career are you looking to have? Are you looking to be primarily clinical? Are you looking
Mm.
to be primarily academic? Do you want to do something else with your career, like be in administration or be in public policy or some other aspect, industry, some other aspect of medicine? And then get some additional detail on what it will take for Joe to have a meaningful life. Because then, and I mean to have a meaningful life in a career in medicine,
Mhm.
because then you can give much better advice for what work-life integration will look like for Joe. Maybe work-life integration looks like working in a private practice where you can work a few shifts or a few days per week and have the rest of the time for your family. That might be what's most important to Joe. Maybe Joe has a partner, maybe Joe has a child, and Joe is thinking about how they can be more present at home. Terrific. Maybe Joe wants to run the hospital where they work, right? Well, then that's a really different conversation.
Mhm.
We're going to have to talk about experience and credentials that you might need. Maybe you need to develop a mentoring relationship with a member of the hospital administrative staff, and et cetera, et cetera. So understanding the context in which our trainees are asking us about integration of work-life balance and where we don't have an understanding, bringing other people in again, once again, ask for help, bringing in other people with that experience who can provide meaningfully is a way to go. I will also say this, and Molly, I appreciate you sharing your unpopular opinion before. I'm going to share an unpopular opinion as well. I also think that there are some unrealistic expectations that exist within the younger generations of medical trainees around what it looks like to be a faculty member or what it looks
Mm.
like to have a career in medicine. And I'm not saying that their goals are wrong or not laudable. Absolutely, I think it's wonderful that our medical trainees today are demanding more out of the field, that they're demanding more out of their professions. But I also think it's important for trainees today to appreciate the environment in which they are going to be working and recognize that it may require some sacrifices that their peers in other spaces or other professions in other industries are not making, and decide if that is what you want out of your careers. I think that that's really, really important. As we continue to put pressure on the field of medicine to be more equitable, to be more diverse and inclusive, to be more friendly to families and individuals who have families, we should also appreciate that we're not there yet. And you having a meaningful career, making the kinds of contributions you want to make, might involve you making some sacrifices as well along the journey. I don't think that that is an unrealistic expectation to share with our trainees either.
I wish we could bottle that up, Ray, and just like put it on blast on Twitter or X or whatever. Just because I actually think that's not an uncontroversial opinion among those of us in faculty and those of us advising folks in other generations or other kind of approaches to medicine. And also, I think there's something to be said about what is realistic and what's not realistic. Not necessarily like, as you were saying, what's maybe adjustable about your goals, but really what can actually happen in today's healthcare landscape. And the way you phrased that just now was chef's kiss. It was very good.
I appreciate that. One of the podcasts I enjoy listening to is the Pivot podcast. It's a business and tech podcast with Kara Swisher and Scott Galloway. And one of the things that Scott Galloway, who's an entrepreneur and a business professor at NYU, one of the things he loves to say is, you can have it all, you just can't have it all at the same time. And I really do think there's some truth to that. Unless you are a trust fund baby, and if you are, that's fabulous. Like, hats off to you. Yeah. What an achievement. But unless, if that's not your story, there's probably going to be a time when you are going to be working harder than you want to work. There's probably going to be a time where you're sacrificing home time for work time, or vice versa. You're more at home than you are at work. And what that looks like is going to be unique to your circumstances. And that's okay. That's okay. As long as you're fulfilled, as long as your family, your partner, your spouse, your children, or other dependents are acknowledging of that, supportive of that, you're contributing in other ways to the function of your family or your other important relationships. As long as you are on the same page there, that could be okay. You can have it all. You just can't have it all at once. And until someone figures that out, we're going to have to be open to making those sacrifices and being honest about communicating those sacrifices with our trainees.
Amazing. Well, I love that approach of really learning more, hearing more from the mentee, and also being honest and being real about your feelings once you understand their situation. Just to do one more question I think we have time for. So Joe and Julia have created this great mentoring relationship. Joe really trusts Julia and appreciates her guidance. And so a few months later, he brings some feedback that he received to Julia and wants her take on it. He got some feedback saying that he wasn't focused on patient care. He wanted to leave the hospital early. And Julia's really didn't get this impression at all from working with Joe in clinic. She sees him as, very dedicated when he's seeing patients in the clinic, very hardworking. And so just wondering how you approach a conversation with a mentee who's getting negative feedback or constructive feedback that doesn't jive with what you're seeing in them.
Been there. Definitely been there, where you feel like you're getting feedback from someone that is very different from the way your work is perceived by others. So I guess maybe the first thing that I would tell Joe is let them know that I've been in that situation before. And and acknowledge that it sucks. I think
Mhm.
it's very important for mentors where possible and it where it's applicable to share with their mentees their lumps.
Mm.
Very often, mentees look up to mentors as if they've navigated their entire academic experience, their entire professional experience with no bumps and no hurdles. And that is never the case, almost never the case that that's true. And when mentors are honest about those challenges, it can often be freeing, liberating for the trainee, and provide them with important insight that grounds them in their own experience. So, if this were my situation, yeah, I would totally tell Joe, I've been there too, and I know that that stinks. Let's take a look at the feedback that you received. Let's try to understand the context in which it was given. And let us try to see if we can sift through why, number one, this supervisor would have provided this feedback. And number two, what we can take from it that will make us better in the future. It could be that Joe is just not performing well in this one rotation or this one particular clinic or experience. It could be that Joe really did have an off day and that they really just this was not their moment. So I think we should leave space for the possibility that that was true, but especially when you feel that the feedback may have been biased. We've been talking a lot about Joe's minoritized identities, and that's obviously very obvious to Joe. It's obviously also obvious to Julia. So other people probably recognize these minoritized identities as well. And we understand that many people, all of us, hold implicit biases, of course, and many people will hold implicit biases against minoritized identities. Could it be that Joe's minoritized identities are influencing the way that they're receiving feedback from their supervisors? It's possible.
Mhm.
And understanding how to walk through that feedback with a trainee, especially a trainee with minoritized identities, is an important way to teach the trainee that this happens sometimes, how to deal with it when it happens, and most importantly, how to sift through the feedback that was received to understand how to improve performance later. I'm a big believer in the fact that all feedback is valuable, even if it is inaccurate. It may be just the feedback you received. It could be completely inaccurate, but the fact that you received it from that person informs the way you approach other situations, either with that person or
Mm.
with other people who are similar to that person, because it might help you navigate those situations and those contexts more smoothly. I'm all about helping trainees to navigate situations smoothly. I'm very much a sort of go along to get along kind of person.
Yes.
I am not a flamethrower. I try not to be controversial. I want everyone to like me. Blah blah. I'm one of those people, and I know that not everyone is like that. And I respect that there are others who are a lot more in your face, and the advice that they would give you if they were in this seat right now on this podcast might be really different than the advice I'm sharing with you right now. But I would say this is an example of a place where we can really be helpful with our trainees by understanding what the other person is saying and how they're saying it, and helping our trainees to navigate those situations more smoothly, even if the information was inaccurate.
Right. I'm a big fan of right sizing feedback, which is, I think, what you just beautifully shared. And also getting that like kernel, that little nugget of helpful information out of feedback that does sound just like way left field. There's some little pearl in there. It's just a matter of
Somewhere.
like, yeah, like you said, sifting through it and being the mentor that like helps someone sift through it because
Yeah.
it can feel really not just murky, but uncomfortable to be like, ooh, I don't like
Yeah.
this is terribly written. And I wonder, how do you, when you do this sifting with somebody, let's say, how do you kind of do the faculty development? Like, how do you keep your skills sharp and get yourself kind of continuously improving in the way that you sift through this information or kind of guide people in this? Like, do you have any resources, or do you have practices that you do, like just doing this a lot and mentoring successfully a lot? What could you share for us?
Yeah, I would definitely say practice makes proficient. So definitely practicing this is helpful. I am endlessly self-critical, which may not be very healthy, but it's real. So I'm constantly evaluating myself. I have no harder critic than me in every situation, whether that's performing a kidney biopsy, or it's addressing a member of Congress in a meeting, or it is working with a medical student mentee. It's all the same. I'm constantly critiquing how I did it and how I could do better. So that's definitely one element. I would encourage our listeners to be mindful of their own mental health when being self-critical, by the way. I don't want people to be so self-critical that it is not healthy, and explore the degree to which they're being self-critical, and whether or not it's affecting their mental health adversely. I also think it's important to pursue mentorship yourself. I think this is probably the most important thing, is get mentorship from someone else. Schedule regular check-ins with peer mentors and with senior mentors to provide you with feedback that you can continue to apply to others. I actually think we far undervalue peer mentorship. Faculty meeting time in our division is some of the most valuable time on our calendars. We have a 2-hour block on Tuesday afternoons where all the nephrology folks come together. And sometimes we don't even really have a very strict agenda. We just talk about patients, and we eat lunch and we chit chat. It might feel to some people like a waste of time. Are there more productive things, in air quotes, that we could do during that time? Sure, there are. But when it comes to relationship building and learning from others, and especially from senior faculty members in our division, there's no better way to do that than gathering together and sharing stories and ideas, and learning and helping each other with problems and problem solve challenges that we have. So yeah, definitely being mindful to give yourself feedback anytime you perform, whether it's giving a talk or mentoring a trainee. And also, especially getting feedback from your own mentors is very valuable. And I would just add a plug. There are so many terrific professional development resources around mentorship, some very excellent publications around mentorship. Many of them we've discussed during this podcast today. And I'm really grateful for those resources.
Thank you, Ray. That's fantastic. Any last take-home points that you want to leave our listeners with around mentorship?
Yeah, I'll just tell you a quick story. So I had one of the most incredibly valuable mentoring experiences of my entire career, my life, that occurred in January of 2022. So I was invited to be the keynote speaker at the APAMSA national meeting. So APAMSA stands for the Asian and Pacific American Medical Students Association. It is a national association of medical students of Asian ancestry. And they asked me, an African American male pediatrician, to be their keynote speaker. And I tell people that this was the most valuable, precious invitation I've ever received to speak. Because it was the first time I had been invited as a minority to a space that was dominated by people of another minority group. I'm used to being the only Black person in an all-white space. That happens frequently. That's something I have a lot of experience with. But to be the only Black person in a space full of people of Asian and Pacific American ancestry was a super unique experience. It gave me a lot of empathy for other individuals who are in similar experiences. Say, for example, my white colleagues who are in an all-Black space when they come to present, say, at an all-Black church in the community or something like that. It's given me a lot of perspective. But I would say the most interesting element of that experience for me was actually preparing my talk. So I had this really great talk that I give when student groups ask me to come. ways to survive and thrive as a minority in medicine, something like that. And it's just sort of things that I've learned along my journey as a minority in medicine that I think are helpful not only for other minoritized students, but all students, I think, so that they can survive and thrive in their training. So I was adapting this talk, and it's always good practice for those of you who put presentations together. It's always good practice to try to include elements with which the audience will be familiar in the talk.
Mhm.
And I knew that it would be good for me to include my mentoring relationships with other Asian and Pacific American medical students until I realized that I don't really have that many mentoring relationships with other Asian and Pacific American medical students.
Hmm.
And that was a real moment of aha for me, where I realized I had a gap in my interactions with others that I could help to fill. I had a gap in the diversity of trainees that I was mentoring. And here I am trying to encourage others to talk about, to think about being diverse in who they mentor. There's a gentleman, Dr. Anthony Nguyen, who is a graduating family medicine physician resident in California. He was a medical student here at Ohio State and someone that I have mentored quite a bit. And we had taken a picture together. And I was like, oh, yeah, I'm going to use this picture I had with Anthony. I'm sure I could find it. And let me tell you, the panic that set in when I'm scouring my phone for this picture that I took with Anthony, it just sort of emphasized to me this huge gulf chasm that existed with this entire important, valuable, precious population of trainees that for whatever reason, I had not been mentoring. And it was a real moment of, I could say, shame for me. Like, here I am being invited to speak to this group of people, and I don't even have a way to reflect their community in the images I use to present to them. Got lots of pictures I could showcase of white trainees, Black trainees, women trainees, all kinds of other groups, but not this particular group. And it was a moment for me to say, I can definitely do better. I share that story to say, we should all be looking for opportunities to engage and mentor people who are different from us. And as the great Dr. Kamara Jones often says, when we are seated at tables of power, we should ask ourselves, who is not at this table? And when we figure out who's not at the table, we should then ask ourselves, number one, what must I do to speak on their behalf in support of them? And number two, how can I help those people who are not currently at the table to have a seat at this table as well? And so as we think about the opportunities we have to be great mentors, let's also think about the ways that we can bring new people, new faces, new experiences in, not just to the spaces where we live, work, play, and operate, but also into the very valuable mentoring relationships that we have with students and trainees. I think that that's really important.
Lovely words of inspiration to finish us off. So thank you so much. Well, this has been a really thoughtful discussion and just so great to get to chat with you. And hopefully someday we can meet in person and catch up on our favorite human doctor podcast.
Yes, I would love that. I would love that. No, it was a real pleasure speaking with you guys today. Thank you for the invitation. Happy to come back anytime.
Amazing. Well, have a great rest of your day. Thank you.
Thanks. Take care.
Well, Ira, that was such a fantastic conversation with Dr. Bignall. I just really appreciate his inspiration as a mentor. And I think I was especially reflecting on how valuable it is to get strength from a lot of different mentors. And I know it's something we've discussed before on the podcast, but I think helps me feel more positive as a mentor myself, because often I'm mentoring students or trainees who are not going to go into primary care. And I feel like I'm like, what do I have to offer you as you're going to become this, PhD oncologist? But I think reflecting that we bring different strengths, and I don't have to necessarily share all of the same identities to be able to give them valuable support.
Totally, Molly. And I think piggybacking off of that reflection, I think the power that Ray enforced in us about introspection and kind of what do I as a mentor or mentee, but as a mentor for us to bring to the conversation and bring to the relationship And also kind of that, I think Maya Angelou quote of like, I don't care how much you know until I know how much you care. And just realizing that like bring in, the very first line that Ray said about like, does Joe know that Julia cares, or does Julia care? And kind of really making that clear for yourself and doing that introspection and that reflection up front of, as I engage in this mentorship relationship, how do I feel? How am I caring about this? And also what am I bringing to the relationship? So many pearls. I just can't stop with the pearls.
This has been another episode of our Curbsiders series, The Curbsiders Teach. Get your show notes at thecurbsiders.com/teach. A special thanks to the Alliance for Academic Internal Medicine for making this season possible. And thanks to Dr. Matt Watto and Paul Williams for their support in this project. Thanks to the team at Podpaste for editing and production support. Until next time, I've been Dr. Molly Hoybline.
And we're committed to providing you with high-value, practice-changing knowledge. And to do that, we need your feedback. So please subscribe, rate, review the show on Apple Podcasts, or contact us at thecurbsidersteach@gmail.com. A reminder that most episodes are available for CME credit for all healthcare professionals at curbsiders.vcuhealth.org. All you have to do is create an account. And I'm Dr. Ira Krzyzanowska. Thank you for joining us today and letting us bring you a little nugget of medical edutainment.